In this video, I'll be creating a synthesized chord patch that's going to be making use of some of the chord unison modes that you have inside of Massive X. And the patch is going to sound like this. So this kind of synthesized organ sound is inspired by the song Loud Pipes by Rat-a-tat, which is something that I had in mind whenever I was creating this patch. So to create this patch, we can go ahead and open up a new instance of the synthesizer. Let's go ahead and load up Massive. And I just have that on the standard initialize preset. We can go ahead and swap out the wavetable. So we'll go over to harmonics and then go to saw square ratio, which is a combination of a saw and square waveform, but there's also some higher up additional harmonics that are added onto the sound, which will help make our sound more like a synthesized organ sound. So let's go ahead and make a few different adjustments. The first of which is we're going to take the pitch down to -12. So that way everything is a little bit lower on our keyboard. We can also keep the volume all the way up. And by default, it sounds like this. And as I sweep through this wavetable, you'll hear all those additional harmonics. Which is what we'll be doing with an envelope a little bit later to give our sound those higher up overtones. Next, we can go ahead and go down to our amplifier envelope, make sure the attack is set all the way down, make sure the decay is at halfway, the sustain is all the way up, so as we hold our sound, it plays back at the same volume, and then we can leave the release at its default position. Then we want to go ahead and add just a touch of noise to our synthesizer patch, just to add some kind of high frequencies and a little bit of a distortion type sound to it. And then we want to swap this filter type out to the Blue Monarch filter. And then we'll push the resonance up to 50%, so we'll get a nice high frequency boost. Maybe even just bring that down just a touch. And then we lost quite a bit of the volume and gain from our synthesizer patch. So let's go ahead and make up for that. So let's push the gain control up to about 75% or so. So now we have a little bit more of a full sound. So we could even push the frequency modulation up slightly as well. Just in case we want to make any filter adjustments later, we kind of have a cool distortion effect created by the filter's frequency modulation. Then we can go down to our routings tab and just pop out the position of the noise here. So we'll plug that into FX slot X. So that way the noise is routed around our filter section so that the volume isn't boosted by the resonance control. So that way we don't have too much additional high frequencies. So that's the sound with it routed around. And before we had quite a bit of resonance boost on our white noise, which is something that we don't want. So we'll go ahead and remove that and put the position in FX slot X. You can also hear, because of our resonance boost, the filter's frequency modulation. So this would be without it. So it's a really subtle effect on the synthesizer, but right on the top end on those upper frequencies, you can hear a little bit of frequency modulation happening because of this increase in the frequency modulation amount. Next, let's go ahead and move over to the voicings tab, and we'll make some adjustments to the unison mode. So we'll go over here and enable the unison, change that to 6 voices of unison and push the stereo width all the way up. So now we have a nice and wide sound, which will fatten everything up, and we can also add a little bit of stereo width. Now the main part of this patch is we're actually going to be using this chord morph mode, which enables us to create different harmonies inside of our unison mode. So we'll go ahead and push the chord morph all the way up, and we can push the spread up to just over halfway. So we get quite a bit of stereo spreading happening, and detuning as well. We can leave the note at C so that it plays all these different chords back in the key of C. And by itself, it sounds like this. It's going to be a little bit atonal, but we'll be fixing that by adding in some additional higher frequency harmonics from the wavetable, for modulating the wavetable's position control a little bit later. So right now it doesn't sound like much, but it sounds like this. So it's quite atonal, but once we start adding in these additional higher up frequencies through modulating the wavetable, we'll bring back the melodic content of our synth patch. So let's go ahead and move over to the envelopes. Take the second envelope and set that to control the wavetable's position and have that go almost all the way up. Then we want to go over to the modulation envelope and make a few different adjustments. The first of which will be bringing up the attack just slightly. So it's basically pointing out where the Y is in delay. Bring the decay all the way down, and also keep the release at its default state. We can also push the sustain almost all the way up. So far that synth patch now sounds like this. So because of those upper higher frequency harmonics, it brings back the melodic content of the overall synth patch. And if you want to have that almost pitch slide that happens at the beginning of everything happen a little bit faster, you can bring down the attack control. So that's more of a stab, and if we want it to be really slow, We can kind of make it sweep through those different upper, higher frequency harmonics. We'll bring that down to just about there. And then we could even bump the wavetable's position just slightly so that it's just a little bit more in pitch. So you might have to play with that amount just a little bit so that way it doesn't end up being detuned whenever it sort of pitch bends all the way up. And then the next change that we want to make is a subtle pitch modulation that happens at the beginning of our whole patch. This will accentuate the sort of stab-like quality of this synth. So let's go ahead and go over to the performance envelopes. And you could do this in any of the envelopes, I just prefer to work this way. So we'll go ahead and just create 2 different points on our envelope. Change that to one of the faster note values. And then let's go ahead and assign that to control the pitch. And we'll bring that down to -12. So that sounds like this. And then we can also go ahead and change that to the keyboard trigger mode. So every single time we press a key, it re-triggers the note, and it sounds like this. So it's kind of just helping accentuate the beginning of the synth. Then let's go ahead and add in a short reverb to give our sound a sense of space. Go over to Effects Slot X and change that over to the reverb. And then we want to swap this over to the small dense reverb type, which will give us this really short, almost slapback delay type reverb sound that sounds like this. So it's a really short room reverb. It almost will act like the dimension expander does, but it makes it sound a little bit more natural, like it took place in an acoustic space rather than just being a stereo widening effect. Then we also want to push the chorus up all the way and bring the mix down to about 10 to 15% or so. So it just adds a little bit of a reverb tail at the end of the sound, but doesn't become overwhelming. So with the patch out of the way, we can go ahead and look at the notes that I had in the introduction. So let's go ahead and just close that out. And then I can play you back those notes, which just as a reminder sounded like this. So if we were to look at those notes, it's a really simple note pattern. This is a 4-bar long clip at 164 beats per minute. We first have a C note lasting for half of that first bar, then jumps up to a G note, jumps down to a D note, plays that same D note again, and then jumps up to an A. And the pattern finishes out with this sort of faster section. And all these notes that we have played back here are in the key of C, which is what we have our harmonization set to on the synthesizer. So if we're to play notes that are outside of that key, let's say we played something like this D sharp, for example, it will sound a little bit atonal. So it sounds a little bit off and strange. So you can hear there, because it's outside the key of the synthesizer patch that we created, it sounds a bit off. So that's why I chose the notes within the key of C. So that's all for this synthesizer patch. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.